Hello, welcome back. Thanks for joining again. This next video here is all about the evaluation process that I went through to eventually donate part of my liver. It is a lengthy one, so if I'm looking off to the side, I'm reading my notes because this is quite the ordeal, but a very necessary, important ordeal to make sure that you are the perfect candidate to donate. For me, I would say that this process, at least in Colorado, I could divide into 3 chapters. So chapter 1 was filling out a health questionnaire about my personal health history, our family health history, and lifestyle choices like your level of activity and alcohol use. You could, from what I've heard, get booted out of that questionnaire automatically based on certain answers to certain questions. I don't know which ones those were, but we know some generous family members that were looking into donating to my sister that got disqualified at that point in the process. One that I know for sure was based on age. So at least in Colorado, you had to be 55 or under. So if somebody put in their age as 58 years old, they would automatically be booted out and say, thank you so much for being so selfless and generous and considering this. But unfortunately, you would be at higher risk to go through this operation. So just be aware if that does happen. It doesn't mean you are less selfless. It just means that they don't want to put you at further risk for any kind of health complication from this incredible surgery. So I made it through the questionnaire. Then I got an email to set up a phone call with the nurse coordinator. I would eventually get to know her super well. She walked with me through the whole donation journey. But during this initial phone call, she provided a lot of education to me about what the process would look like, what it would look like leading up to surgery, hypothetically, what the surgery itself entails, and then what the recovery period looks like, including how much time I would need to take off work, which I'll get to in later videos. And then she also just opened the floor up for me to be able to ask questions. And she also asked me to share a little bit more about my personal intentions and why I was interested in donating in the first place. So at the end of that phone call, she was like, sit on it. This is a lot of information. Reach back out to me if you want to move forward in this process. And I said, all right. Wrote back to her or called her back, I can't remember. I was like, I'm in, let's go, let's see what the next step is. And so that brought us to chapter 2. Chapter 2 was getting some lab work done, and that just was trying to match, see what your internal health looked like from blood work and I think a urine sample. And from what I've heard from our transplant center, they, for efficiency's sake for the recipient, would be looking at multiple donors up to this point. So the end of chapter 2, they would have potentially multiple people if you were looking for like a specific recipient that you already had in mind that you were trying to be considered for. Or if you were looking at a non-directed recipient and you were just doing this just because you're an awesome, incredible person, then you could be one of several other people that are being considered for this individual. At that point, after the labs are drawn, they look at all the puzzle pieces with each donor candidate, and the transplant team would choose their top pick to move forward to chapter 3. And so the chapter 3 was like the meatiest part of the evaluation process. It's a 2-day evaluation. You speak with a lot of different health professionals from different disciplines or areas of healthcare, and you get a bunch of imaging done, you get a couple more labs drawn, and so they go through that one at one person at a time. And at any point, the donor candidate can always pull back and say, you know what, this is not the right time for me, or I really wanted to do this, and for whatever reason, I need to back out. And that is absolutely okay. It was reiterated many times in my process to make sure that I was making this decision fully informed. So that brought me to my 2-day evaluation. The first day, I met with a hepatologist or a liver specialist, and she gave me some more education about just general things about the liver and what would change temporarily with your surgery. It regenerates, so then you're like back to normal. Super cool. I also talked to a nutritionist, a psychologist, and a social worker. And the psychologist and the social worker component I thought was just so awesome because the transplant team wasn't just looking at your physical health to make sure that you were a good candidate. They were also making sure that you were in the right mental headspace to not only make this big decision, but also to deal with a pretty significant lifestyle change for a little bit going through the recovery process. Most people that are donating are pretty active people, and so there's some adjustment and growing pains to having to be a little bit more stationary for a bit while you're recovering. So I was just really appreciative of those team members being involved as well to make sure that from all aspects of your life, you were being covered with what information you needed to make this decision. So that was day one. Super overwhelming, but very informative, super great team. And then I went home and came back for day two, which was a lot of imaging in the morning. I got a MRI, a CT scan, and a chest x-ray. And then in the afternoon, I met with the surgeon herself, and she discussed in more detail about the surgery itself and the recovery and the incision and all the awesome science things that I geek out about. And if you want to geek out about, hit me up. I could talk about this for days. And she also told me at that point that we would be sending off my images to a company in Germany that would put together a 3D model of my liver, essentially, with all the like blood vessels and bile ducts, and super, super cool. And then the surgeon could be able to get a better, fuller picture without actually like opening you up to make sure that I was the perfect candidate for my sister. I'll leave that kind of where it sits. That was the end of the evaluation process for me. And we'll talk more in future videos. But one thing that I would say, just for tips if you are going through any parts of these chapters, is write down any questions that you're having. Write down notes from what all these individuals are telling you, because it is a very overwhelming process. And at least for me, I never think of questions right on the spot. I always think of them as I'm driving home after an appointment. And so it just helped immensely to have those notes. I still have my notebook with me that I had taken through that whole process and wrote notes on those phone calls and during each of those appointments with each of those professionals. And it helped a ton. So yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. Stay tuned for more.